Good morning. This is Kat Rendeck with Transition Cornwall Plus Food Action Group. Welcome to the second installment of Cornwall Seedy Saturday. We are going to talk about starting seeds indoors, answering all your questions, and we're going to get started in just a few minutes.
In case it comes up.
They're good plants. Dead plants.
It's just the cubes. It's in the barn. I have the smaller one. I have the bigger one.
Okay, hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I see several people coming on, so that's great. My name is Kat Rendeck, and I am with Transition Cornwall Food Action Group. Really excited to have special guests Jamie McCrae and Matt Lalone from Cornerstone Organics today to address all of your questions about seed starting indoors. At Transition Cornwall Plus, we know that this is probably the #1 question concern this time of year. People aren't really sure when to start, what they need. So we brought in some experts for you. Before we get going, I want to bring a couple things to your attention. So this entire webinar series is thanks to sponsorships with the Eastern Ontario Agri-Food Network and Canadian Organic Growers. So huge thank you to our sponsors for making this possible today. We also had a webinar last week with Pat Lucy, and based on some of your questions, she has put together an additional resource that I want to bring to your attention. So you're going to find this on our website, which is www.transitioncornwall.com/seedysaturday. And I'm going to bring it up here so that you can take a quick look at what we've done. One sec, here we go. Okay, so on our website, you're going to see the webinar 1 and webinar 2. Under webinar 1, I've added in some additional resources at the bottom. It says new, so you should be able to find them. One of them here is a garden plan that another one of our members, Karen Carrier, developed last year. It's sort of a nice 8-by-4-foot plan that includes a garden rotation, a 3-year garden rotation, which was something that Pat Lucy discussed last week during her webinar. So we wanted to throw that up there, make it easy for you to find. This is going to be your beginner garden plan if you just need a little inspiration for where to start. So that's that resource there. You're just going to want to click to download. The second resource is a beginner garden plant suggestion list. This is something that Pat Lucy put together after addressing some of our Ask a Gardener questions. People just not quite sure what was right for them, something that would be easy, annuals versus perennials. So she's really put one big resource together for you, and we would love to encourage you to check it out. If you have additional questions, I want to bring your attention down to our Ask a Gardener submission form at the bottom of our page. This is going to be where we're going to send additional questions to Pat and our other Ask a Gardener resources and get you those questions answered. So also all of our resources are being populated on our website. So anything that we develop here today with Matt and Jamie are going to go under their webinar tab, and then further in webinar 3, you're going to find it there. As a final note for next week's webinar, I want to just say that this weekend is the last weekend to register for our children's activity kit. We're going to start sending them out next week. So if you want to have them in time for next Saturday, you're going to want to submit your request now. And as always, we have various resources for our seed and garden supplies. You can see Cornerstone Organics right here in their website, but we also have a variety of other vendors in here for you to make it easy for you to get your garden plans ready. So that's kind of my housekeeping. I want to encourage you to put any questions as we go through into the chat, and I'm going to have going to have an eye on that and bring them to our guests throughout the webinar. We're going to cover a couple different topics and break for questions. So again, this is going to be your opportunity to ask the experts and get those answers. Now, before I go any further, I'm also going to just say that we have the feed going to a couple different places. So if you aren't finding it, just send us an email, let us know. We're going to make sure that you've got it. Yeah, I think we're ready to go. So Matt and Jamie, you can hear me. We're good. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I have Matt and Jamie from Cornerstone Organics with me here today, and I am just so excited that they could make the time in their busy growing gardening schedule. They are a farm located just outside of the city of Cornwall in Long Sault. They have 3 greenhouses now, I believe, and they've just you know, over the last many years been growing their expertise in organic growing and gardening, and offer a CSA program for consumers, but have also expanded into sort of an online market co-op situation. So I welcome you both here, and I look forward to learning from you. Do you want to talk first a little bit about how you got started with Cornerstone Organics and where you are now?
Sure. So Cornerstone Organics, we've been running the farm for probably about 10 years, but only really more seriously in the last 5 or so. It really just started as a hobby project with our kids, and the demand for local food was there, and it just sort of started with friends and family wanting to buy our extra produce and grew from there. And then about 5 years ago, we decided to do it a little more, not full-time, but a little more full-time, and make it more of an income for the family. And so we started the CSA program. So a CSA is a community supported agriculture, where people get a weekly delivery of the veggies that we pick from that day. So that has been going well for the last few years. And then when COVID hit last year and the farmers markets weren't running, we decided to try an online farmers market. And it went really well. So we were able to sell for up to, I think, 15 other farmers and vendors, mostly farmers. So things like honey and soap and olive oil and beef and pork, and just like, we had this vision of offering all of the local food in SDNG that we could, so that people could still access these things easily. Something that we were kind of concerned was that a lot of these farmers were going to have pickup options, but a lot of people weren't willing to drive to, you know, Alexandria, to Bonneville, to Martintown, to Iroquois, whatever, to get their local food. So we said, okay, we need to do something about this. So because we deliver anyway for a CSA, we thought we'd give it a try, and it went really well. And the farmers were all amazing about wanting to help people access their food locally, of course. So that's something that we're going to continue with this year, that we're really, really excited about, to be able to make sure people can still access the local food, because it's so important. And we have so much great food and products available in Cornwall and SDNG. Like really all you need is in our area. We just need to make sure people can access it easily. So that was really how that came about.
Yeah, I think we were all looking for it. We were all looking for really great local food throughout the whole time. And it's just, I'm really in awe of you guys pulling it together and, you know, just expanding and growing and continuing to look for new partners in this mission of yours. So that's really, you know, well, thank you for the work that you are already doing.
We have amazing produce in SDNG. Like I can't say it enough that like everything we need is in our area. You know, we don't have to get things from far, especially seasonally, like through the summer. SDNG has the best food and farmers and producers and vendors, and it's really important to support all of them right now. So
yeah. Wonderful. Well, with that, we want to support you and learn a little bit more about you. So I see that you are in your growing room, greenhouse. So thank you for, putting all that juicy growing stuff right in front of us. That's a big key part of your business is
Yes.
probably all of your planning and really what you're doing now, which is taking care of what will become your seedlings and your planted, garden and all of that, right? It's all part of that cycle. So, before going into any great detail, I know sort of each of you have sort of different strengths in your garden growing, and your seedling growing. So we're going to hear from both of you. What do you think is sort of something that a beginner gardener who's starting seeds indoors for maybe the first or second year, what's like the number one thing that they should keep in mind in terms of scale or how to? What's your number one recommendation?
Okay, so I would say number one is make a plan,
Okay.
because it can get out of hand really easily. Especially, if you buy a packet of seeds and there's 50 seeds in it, you don't have to plant them all if you're limited for space. And we're limited for space, even though we do it on a larger scale, we still run out of room. So if you're starting seeds for your backyard family garden, make a bit of a plan so that you know what you want, so that you don't end up with 100 tomato plants and no room for anything else. And in that plan to kind of date when you want to start your seeds and stick to that. So a lot of people make the mistake of starting seeds way too early, and then they don't transplant well. So if you start your tomato in January and it's ready to be transplanted in March, it won't transplant well in May or June. It'll be potted, it'll be stuck to its root bound, and it won't grow as well. So make a date plan as well, so that you can sort of stick to your calendar. I still have problems with that, where I get excited and start things too early. But we learn as we go. So making a plan is number one.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really important. I think, what we really were talking about in our first webinar was this planning thing is more important than maybe people give it credit for. And a lot of people were asking questions about, can I start, or should I start my squash now or my zucchini now? And it's way too early, right? But
yeah,
some beginner gardeners, they get excited and
me too.
Don't necessarily realize that there is a schedule to that. So, but also that certain things don't even need to start indoors as seedlings, that you can go direct to soil in the spring. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, when we're talking about starting seeds indoors, what types of plants are we really talking about or prioritizing for our region here in Eastern Ontario?
Sure. So the first things that we start are the tomatoes and peppers. If you're not sure about something, just look at the seed packet. Most seed packets will tell you how many weeks before the last frost date to start them. So you don't have to complicate it. It's generally 6 to 8 weeks for most things that you start inside, other than like your squash and your cucumbers. Those are usually more of a 4-week before the last frost date. In our area, we usually go by the May 2-4 as the last frost date, but you can always Google the exact dates. But end of May basically is so you count back the 6 to 8 or 10 weeks depending on what the seed packet says. So I can't say every single plant off the top of my head. I still have to look at the packet sometimes and say like, oh yeah, this is 6 weeks or 4 weeks. Even for some of the flowers we do, some of them are 10 to 12 weeks, some of them are 2 to 4 weeks.
Even ourselves, we've been pushing the May 2-4 was the norm for a long time, and we plant the first week of June usually now, just because it seems like the season's getting a little bit longer, so the frost comes later.
Yeah, we had a few late frosts in the last few years. Yeah, so make sure to watch your weather reports and stuff to make sure that you're not planting out too soon. But yeah, so we start the tomatoes and peppers and eggplant. Those are all like your greenhouse plants, your hothouse plants. Those are usually 8 to 10 weeks. And if you miss the 8 to 10 week mark, you can still plant them. A lot of people think it's too late once they get into like late March or April. It's not. A lot of times whether you start something at the beginning of March or the beginning of April, a few weeks in the garden, they catch up to each other. Like once they're in the ground and the sun hits them and the water hits them and the nutrients hit them, they catch up. By the end of the season, everything is the same size, whether it was started in April or May, or you know what I mean? So it's not too late if you haven't started your 8 to 10 week plants.
A lot of the starting too early, you're just kind of nursing the plant for longer, trying to keep it alive and giving it, it's hard. It'll run out of nutrients eventually indoors. So you really want to plant it to be able to get to the garden.
Yeah.
The soil has to be a certain temperature also before it starts certain parts of its life cycle. So the plant kind of sits there dormant, waiting in the field, even though it's bigger, before it starts producing any flowers or anything like that.
Yeah. So they catch up.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, so much good information. Thank
We
you.
started tomatoes in January one year, and we had plants that were 2 feet tall that we had to keep alive for an extra 3 months.
And
before
they
they
don't
fruited
do
at
well.
the same time as the others,
Yeah.
and they don't
They don't do as
they don't
well.
produce as well, the roots that come down.
And also because the plants tend to catch up, the only reason why people start earlier is like commercial growers or market gardeners that want to be the first one at the market to have tomatoes or the first one at the market to have cucumbers. So if that's not your agenda, don't try to rush it.
No.
Because those people have heated greenhouses, workers, you know, like all of those things. So even though we're market gardeners, we don't try to be the first to market or whatever, because we don't have commercial heated greenhouses to transplant into in March or whatever. So, you know, kind of go with Mother Nature and don't try to rush it.
Excellent advice. Thank you. I mean, I think, so we did get a couple questions specifically about, you know, the scheduling and is there a schedule that we should be following? And I think really the answer is you're working backwards from when you intend to put it in the ground, and also maybe how much time and energy you have to baby the plant if it's not quite the right conditions. And so it's really about making the right choice for you and your gardening and your capacity at that time. And then also space, because if they get too big and they're taking over whatever space you put them in your house, you're going to run into some problems. So
space is huge. Space is huge.
So that's, I mean, that's one really big takeaway, I think, for me. I always run into that. I find in May,
we
still do every year.
Regretting every prior decision.
We still
you know, that I know people like that is going to be a personal decision, also what they've planned for their gardens, so knowing what to plan when and where they're going to put it. We also had a question here. I'm wondering, maybe I'll shoot over to the question. So we have an individual who's here watching, who's just purchased a new home and with a really huge garden ready to go, and wants to plan so that she's planting continuously and you know, thinking about that as she's also starting her seeds. So do you have some thoughts or feedback on that type of planning?
Sure. So when it comes to successional planting, things like tomatoes and peppers and stuff, you don't really successionally plant because it keeps producing. So your tomatoes, peppers, those greenhouse, hothouse things, you can't really successionally plant them, you know, midsummer to produce late fall. It doesn't work like that. So then it comes down to more of your direct seeding. So the things that you plant right in the ground are going to be your carrots, turnips, beets, radishes. These are all things you don't start indoors. You put the seed right in the ground. And those things, obviously, it depends on what you want to eat, but generally it's about a 2-week space in between for your succession. So you can plant some radishes, wait 2 weeks, plant some more, but it kind of comes down to how much space you have and do you really want that many radishes or carrots or whatever. But also what you have room for. Like we kind of plan things that when one row is empty and a new set of seeds will go in, but we're selling those things, right? So I need to keep that constant supply. But if it's just generally you have this nice backyard garden and you want to make sure you have food all season, just every 2 weeks plant a little bit more. So, you know, something that a lot of people make the mistake is that they fill their garden day one. But if you fill your garden day one, everything is going to be ready at one point, and then you won't have time to seed more. So it's better to maybe plant a third of your direct seeding, wait 2 or 3 weeks, plant another row. So leave a few rows empty for those successions, because things like carrots take so long that you're not going to be picking them and then having an empty space to put something else in. They take quite a while to grow.
Right.
So leave some empty space if you're planning on doing successions.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Just to follow up on that,
Yeah.
most of your seed packets will have, it'll say DTM, it'll be a days to maturity on it. There'll be a
Okay.
DTM on the packet. So you can plan your, if you have, I don't know, pick a product, but if your days to market is 3 months or 2 months, you can start your stuff again for the next seed packet 6 to 8 weeks before that day, if you follow me.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
plant something in row 1 that's ready in 6 weeks, you can start something else right away after you've planted it that you know you can transplant into that space later.
Very helpful.
And you can get more specific too with like what stuff grows better in the fall, you know, so then you'll know that in, let's say, July, you're planting turnips for the fall, or,
Yeah,
you know, that kind of thing. Like that gets a little more advanced and you'd have to do some of your own research a little bit, but
peas are like that, right?
or like for some things don't do well in the heat. So if you're planting spinach, you can plant it early and late, but in the middle of the season in the heat, it doesn't do so well. So like we're getting into a little more advanced sort of discussion, but it doesn't have to be complicated. 90% of the information really is on most of the seed packets, or just a simple Google search, you know, that what, like things like spinach and lettuce don't love the heat, you know, so it doesn't have to get really complicated. But when you're doing your successions, you can sort of take that into account. Let's say that you don't want to plant certain things if they're going to be peaking in August when it's really hot, or vice versa.
Yeah. Quick products, always radishes and like table turnips. They're
and
they're a 1 month from seed to maturity. They're 1 month, so you can always throw them in. And seed and lettuces, like a mesclun mix, you can always throw that into a row. And
leaf lettuce.
Yeah, if you think you only have 6 weeks left in the season, then you still want something to produce.
Yeah, and I think those are, I mean, those are really great examples of things you really don't maybe need to think about starting now at all, unless you're doing something like a cold frame. But you know, when we're talking about your plan, this is part of that planning process. So much planning.
Well, we've lost kind of the planning. The beginning gets planned, and then throughout the season, we kind of just keep a bunch of these extra seeds around, and every once in a while, we're like, oh, there's an empty space. Let's fill it.
Yeah, because it's never your plan is going to fall apart at some point.
Yes.
You have to also plan for the plan not working at some point, and just being okay with sort of going with the flow later in the season. But I think it's, you know, unless you're really hardcore and passionate, don't make it complicated. You know, if you have a full-time job or kids, I tell this to people all the time and I get funny looks. It's not that I'm discouraging people to have their own gardens. I love that. And people message us, love to help people plan their gardens. We sell seedlings in the spring, and love to see people growing food. But if you have a busy lifestyle, or you like to go away a lot, or you have a, you know, shift job, just support your local farmers, you know, save your lawn, support your local farmers, and, you know, or keep it really simple. You have a couple tomato pots on your deck, some herbs, you know, like, and then you're still getting the satisfaction of growing your own food without hating it by the end of the season.
Or having a big weed plot if you
or just giving yourself too much work to do, right? But I know that the point of this is to learn about starting your own seeds. But I always like to say that because I have friends every year that message me that are like, okay, this is the year I want to have a garden. And knowing their lifestyle, I'm like, are you sure? You know, it's a lot of work.
and just be manageable, you know, through everything. Right. And so even at this stage, you know, think about the scale. Don't start the whole seed packet. Like, these are all really good things to know. So I know some people who might be starting fresh, or maybe have inherited some equipment, things like that. What are your recommended tools, tricks? What do you guys use that's sort of tried and true that's going to work in terms of lights, trays? You know, what happens if you don't have those things? Just let's speak a little bit about what we need to start seeds indoors.
Okay, so I'll start with how we start stuff, and then I'll let Matt take over for like the lights and the racks and all that stuff.
Great.
Yeah, so like whenever I mentioned before we started the live, is that Matt and I both have our strengths, and Matt is way more of the numbers guy and the builder guy. Like when it comes to the lights and the running the electricity and building the shelves and everything, that's more him. When it comes to like picking the plants and seeding them and organizing the garden, that's more me. So to start your seeds, again, keep it simple. Seeds don't need a really fertile soil to start in. So we buy an organic pro mix, which, because we buy it in huge bricks, you can't get it locally. We have to get it from Richie's in Ottawa, but I believe you can get the organic pro mix in smaller bags from Home Depot or Canadian Tire, that kind of thing. And also the Jiffy peat pellets are really good. A lot of people kind of don't think that those are great for some reason because they're just empty peat, but that's all your seeds need to start. They don't need nutrients until after their leaves come in. So just those little cheap Jiffy peat pellets are really good. So, and the Pro Mix is basically the same, like it's kind of a neutral, empty soil, I'll call it. And just some little trays. If you like to be more homemade, there's a ton of tricks on YouTube and stuff to make little homemade, you know, newspaper seed starters or eggshell seed starters, whatever. Like there's a lot of great little tips. But because we're on a bigger scale, we just have the trays are called 72 trays. So there's 72 holes in a tray that we just put the soil in, put the seed in. And then seeds like to be in the dark. So you can cover the seeds either with another tray or a piece of newspaper or whatever you have to let them germinate in the dark. Most seeds, there's some seeds that do require light, but your average vegetable seed, just cover them until they germinate. Once they germinate, then you want to let the light get to them. You do need to have a warm environment. It doesn't have to be hot. Actually, hot is bad, but it can't be too cold or too hot. The best thing, we start our seeds actually this year, we're in our basement right now. We used to start our seeds in the loft of our barn, but once we calculated the square footage, we realized that we were better off putting things on shelves, and we actually got more square footage doing the shelves rather than having everything out on the huge table. So if anybody watched us last year, we showed the huge lights that we had, you know, which are great. There's nothing wrong with that, but it wasn't maximizing our square footage, and space is always an issue. So we decided it would be better to come inside, and because we were also having to heat the barn and run all of those lights. So the electricity wasn't really realistic. Whereas in the house, the basement is cooler, but we're obviously heating our house. So we get more square footage out of the racks than on the big tables and the pallets that we used to use. Then once you're, so yeah, the temperature in the room is important, but we like to use heat mats. So if you're just starting a few seeds in your home, you can buy a heat mat for like $20-$30 at Canadian Tire or TSC, whatever. Or some people just like to use old heat blankets or whatever, because the temperature of the soil is more important than the temperature in the room. It's the soil that needs the heat, not the plant. The roots need the heat. So if you get a little heat mat, you can put your trays on it and they will germinate 100 times better than if you didn't have them on. You don't need it. If you don't want to buy that, they'll still germinate. It's just a nice little trick, I guess, if you're wanting to germinate at home. So we don't have heat mats on everything, but we have it on quite a few of our tables that we put the things on to help it germinate a little faster. And then you
I think maybe on that with the heat mat. So I obviously watched last year as the host, and that was the trick that I took from your little segment. Oh my gosh, it was so good.
Huge difference.
Mind blown. I regret the last, whatever, 5-10 years of seed starting without it. So yes, I'm going to endorse that particular recommendation.
Yes. And you don't need it. If you just want to have a few plants in your windowsill or whatever, that's cool. It's just, you know, if you're wanting to up your game, the heat mats are a great trick.
Same thing
Yeah.
with germinating. If you want to, again, if you actually take the time to plant them and water them and cover them with something dark and put them in the dark and keep them at a warmer temperature, you'd have to read the seed packet again. Everyone's a little bit different, but like eggplants, you'll have 100 times more production for your seedlings if you actually let them germinate properly. 3-4 days in the dark with the right temperature, and they'll be that much better.
Yeah.
But we don't do that.
No,
So.
and that's like, there's things that you know, we should do that we might do a bit differently just for the space and time that we have.
Mhm.
So you know, not everything has to be perfect. Seeds will grow.
Yes.
You know, your germination might be a little better one way or the other, but they will grow. And just keeping them watered. You don't have to drown your plants, but you don't let them completely dry out. At least until they've fully germinated and maybe got their first set of leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Then the watering changes a little bit, but just that initial, just don't let them dry out. Just make sure they stay moist. And that's it. It doesn't have to be really more complicated than that. The only other thing I can show you that we use is one of these. I don't know if you can really see well, but what's it called? What are they called? They're soil blocks.
Soil block maker.
So it just like, again, this is probably something most home gardeners won't need, but it makes little soil blocks. So instead of buying a tray that has holes, or instead of buying the peat pellets or whatever, it just makes little blocks. And then so if you're the type of gardener that's going to be doing hundreds of seedling starts, it's something fun. You can order them online or at
This is from Lee Valley.
Lee Valley, thank you. So, you know, and they're not super expensive, and you can make your own little soil blocks. I prefer the trays myself because I like to be able to just grab a handful of soil, put it in the tray. Matt likes the soil blocks more because he likes to be able to build his own. So, you know, to each his own. The seeds will grow. Don't overthink it. Don't over worry about it. Just make sure they don't dry out, and make sure they don't get too hot. Some people like to put the lights really close to the seeds because they're afraid of the you know, from them getting too leggy.
Yeah, leggy.
Like everybody asks us that every year. My tomatoes get too leggy, you know, like they get too stringy. So people put the lights really close to them to help stop that, but it's too hot. So don't put your lights right on your seeds. And if your tomatoes get leggy, they'll catch up.
A lot of the times it's more the colors and not the light being too far away. It's that it doesn't have the proper colors in the spectrum.
Yeah, so I'll let him take over for that anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think we're gonna, there's a couple people asking about that specifically. So Matt, lights.
Do you want to shoot out some of the questions so I make sure that I cover them?
No. Let's talk lights and then we'll jump back. Yeah.
Okay, so lights, we always use the big lights. We use big 400 watts, 1,000 watt lights. Again, there's nothing better than that other than the sun. In my opinion, all these LEDs and fluorescents, they're not the same. But this year, like Jamie said, we moved everything to the basement. It was a square footage thing and a convenience thing. We have the same amount of plants down here, believe it or not, than we had upstairs in a 1,600 square foot grow room. We did it all on tables, so it was one layer in the whole room, where here we're going 4 or 5 layers high. So we're really making up that square footage. Again, we did upgrade to all new LED lights this year.
Because we had to. The big lights we had wouldn't work.
They wouldn't work down here, and they were honestly fairly cheap. We can get about 6 lights for $130 to $150. So and they're very good and they're cheap, right? Right now we're doing all these plants here for about 1,000 watts, 1,500 watts. So that's 2 of the lights that we used to use. And compared to, we used to have 6 to 8 of them up there. So we're using a 1/6 of the electricity right now for the same amount of plants.
And not heating.
And not heating, because we're already heating in the house.
Yeah.
So our plan is to move these, the bigger plants, so tomatoes, peppers, and stuff like that, we'll move them out to the greenhouse, and we'd prefer to heat the greenhouse earlier. Then it'll balance out, or we'll be ahead. Plus the plants are way happier in the sun. So if you have a sunny area, forget about lights. You don't need them. Put them in the window, keep them in the sun.
South facing.
Nothing will grow better than the sun.
Yeah. but it's a good south facing window.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
correct.
Well, and I think that's
not
a really
always
good
direct
point
sunlight either.
Yeah.
of if you don't want to make the big investment into lights, find
Yeah,
a spot
you
in your
don't
home
need
that's
to.
going to work.
Oh yeah, and it's
well.
better.
Yeah.
The
It's better
sun
than
is
any light
better.
you can buy. All these lights, all we're ever trying to do is replicate what the sun's doing to the best ability.
Yes,
So,
the sun. Okay,
that's right.
love that. I think one thing to just to say about that though, that if you are going to put them in a window, put them a little bit far back so that they're not going to get too cold from the actual temperature of the window, so that you're just maintaining that temperature.
That's right.
If that is your light of choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so we are now switching some gears with questions to with regards to lights. So someone's asking here, do the lights stay on 24/7? So you want to talk about the kind of your recommended lighting schedule?
So it depends on what you read. Typically you want to run them, 10 to about 10 hours, 10 to 12 hours. And that'll depend again on the type of light and the heat that it gives out and the variety of plant and where that plant's from. If it's a plant from southern compared to plants that are from up here, all that changes. But I'm very simple. I'm cheap and I live. We have Hydro One, so as soon as we're on the low, when we're on low consumption, I run it through that cycle.
Yeah, we run the lights at night.
I run them at night because it's cheaper.
Cheaper. And we're trying to replicate the sun, right? So you don't need to have lights on 24/7. That's not how nature works.
No, the plant needs its downtime. So really, I mean, it's what I've learned in the last 10 years from multiple farmers that have been super helpful over all these years is don't complicate it. And it's not, a lot of people are looking for an exact answer right now, and I'm not giving it to you because it's not that important, and there is no exact answer. Same with start dates. That's why it says 6 to 8 weeks, because it's not,
It will catch up.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. And if you're once you move it outside into the sun, it's going to really grow much better. So, if you have your lights on for 10 hours and you can get your starts going, and then once they get outside, they're going to thrive more anyway.
It's nice you said about the heat mat and how it really helps out. And that just goes to show it's the same thing when you're putting stuff into the garden. You need that soil to heat up. So the temperatures in June, July, you have to wait until the sun has enough time to heat that soil, up to 6 inches a foot down. And it works identically to that heat mat. So it's the exact same thing.
We're trying to replicate nature. Some people like to get really technical with the timing of the lights and the exact temperatures and the exact everything. And that's cool, like especially on the huge commercial levels where, those little changes do, change the percentage of their income and stuff, like that's cool. But on a smaller scale, we've trialed a lot of things and we find it's just best to kind of go with what works best for you in your space. And then once you get it outside in the ground, it'll thrive in the right conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually really encouraging.
Yeah, we do
right?
trial things sometimes. I mean,
yeah,
a little bit of a nerd in the growing area. We like to play with things and trial, but you can't make everything like that because it becomes very discouraging if you start missing dates and things. You need to just work with it as a system and let the system go.
Yeah, and do what works for you. But like in the beginning, we were the same. We wanted exact answers. Tell me the exact day I need to put this seed in this soil with this tray. Like, we were like that too. So I understand. But we learned from some older farmers. Like we took workshops all over the place. We visited farms. We, did a lot of those things. And what we learned from the older farmers was to chill out. Like, like when I'd say, no, please tell me the exact type of soil and the exact date that you put in the ground. And they're like, what? No, we don't.
And they were laughing.
We don't do that, so not, for sure plan absolutely. But don't sweat the small stuff, right? Like just go with what works for you. And what works for your space and your time, and nature will take over outside.
Yeah. You're keeping it alive till you can get it outside, and then it's fine.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's so encouraging to hear someone who's gardened for a long time, but also for newer gardeners. And you're talking about kind of that comfort in structure and stuff, and actually just allowing nature to do its thing and to observe. Like part of this whole thing is really about observing and taking the temperature, but like literally, like, pun intended, I guess, but like watching, making decisions, reacting, learning from your prior experiences, learning from other gardeners. I mean, I think that's really all part of this entire experience of home gardening.
And be prepared for something to go wrong.
And that's the guarantee.
Was it last year? No, the year before last, we had planted down here in the basement, and we had everything beautiful, the most beautiful squash plants we've ever had. And one night, there was a failure with the heating system, and I walked into the room and it was 95 degrees, and we had lost
everything,
over 1,000 plants. And it was, but then we just, we kept moving, and the year it was a great year.
Yeah. And then we ended up having to buy some seedlings from Tournesol in Quebec, because they do organic seedlings too. And it was like, well, okay,
here we go.
We're gonna need to buy some this year, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing we got from some of the older farmers. Like, we've taken a lot of workshops, and the ones with the older farmers, I keep saying old, sorry guys, the more experienced farmers,
yes, there we go,
we're the most laid back about it all, because if you stress about it all the time, you're gonna go crazy. So you need to just roll with it and accept the failures as a learning experience. We'll never lose plants to heat again because of that.
Yeah.
So gotta roll with it.
No, that's very good. I mean, I can think of so many mistakes that I've made. We were talking about starting things maybe too early, and then it gets potted, so that, or I'm constantly having to water, or I have to go find bigger pots to transplant out, or that the transplants don't work really well, or even putting them outside too early so that they don't harden off properly, right? So like all of these things, you're told them, but it's not really until you make that mistake that you fully understand the nature of that mistake, and then also how to deal with it, right? So how to fix it, how to avoid it in the future. I can think of a few squash that got too cold when I put them outside, but then I've never done that since, and they still did well. As you say, nature took care of it. They still made it back. They made it into the garden. They got warm. They grew. They thrived. And there's actually a lot of confidence that I have in nature and sort of taking over where I make mistakes.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's part of the process. Yeah.
And it's the same with not planting out too soon. Every year we get so many people that tell us like, oh, I lost all my plants because we got a late frost.
Yeah.
So don't rush the plants into the ground. Like, because we sell seedlings, people want seedlings by mid-May.
Because they think May 2/4 is the weekend, and it's not that anymore. It's really,
you really have to watch the forecasts, and even then, it's not going to hurt.
The first week of June.
It won't hurt to wait an extra week. The plants won't not produce, or like we keep seeing things catch up. So like I highly recommend not rushing it, like, because like we're fairly small, and we don't sell a million seedlings like some of the bigger greenhouses do. So what happens is that if we don't have our plants ready by May 2/4, people will go and buy the cheaper ones, at wherever, and put them in the ground and lose them, and then buy them from us later. So yeah, don't rush the process.
Yeah. Well, so we've actually got a question. Oh,
yeah. No, go
question
ahead.
Kind of on this about hardening them off. So I think there's people maybe who've done the seed starting, but aren't sure about the hardening off process. Do you want to take a couple minutes to talk about that? Yeah,
definitely. So we, and again, that's even new to us still. I mean, last 4 or 5 years, last year was the first year that we had a heated greenhouse. So we did move things out there earlier, and some of the plants did get sunburnt and stuff. And those are, again, those are things that we learned and all those plants are still fine. So anybody that if your plant gets sunburnt and starts to turn yellow, it's still fine. Like, put it in the shade, and it'll come back 100%, unless it died, of course. But so the hardening off.
Like, to keep it simple for home gardeners, like if you don't have a greenhouse and stuff, just once the temperatures get cooler during the day, And again, it doesn't have to be a specific temperature, just, you know, in, let's say, mid-April, late April, you can, if you have a tray of seedlings, you can just sit them outside for a few hours at a time
Yeah,
and bring them back in.
just start with 15 minutes, put it on your deck or something, maybe not in direct sunlight to start for the first day, and the next day maybe go 20 minutes in that space, and the next day.
Yeah.
It does make a difference. And
there are a few reasons for hardening off. One is temperature. Your plants will be more hardy if you give them a chance to be exposed to the temperatures. They will naturally protect themselves, so they'll become a stronger plant if you expose them to cooler temperatures in small amounts. But also the sun, they do get sunburnt if you put them from inside to outside in full sun overnight. So again, the plants will develop their own sort of security system to prevent from being sunburned, just like our own skin. So that's sort of twofold. So if you don't do it, you can still plant them outside and they'll be okay. They might suffer a little bit and look not so great for the first week or so, but they'll be okay.
And you may lose
and
some.
You might lose some. But overall, if you don't do it, it's okay. But if you want to try hardening off, just keep exposing them a little bit at a time to outdoor temperatures and outdoor lights before you transplant them out. It doesn't have to be like more complicated than that.
But only start with 10-15 minutes at a time.
Yeah, and work your way up.
You can, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be direct sunlight. So we'll put them inside. Sometimes we put them in the barn downstairs, and we'll just open the big garage door, and it just lets some like ambient light in to just start them off. Peppers, especially peppers, they like to be in the shade. So peppers, I'll leave them under the growing tables in the greenhouse.
Just while they're hardening off.
Yes.
Then they like full sun in the garden.
Yes.
Right.
But as a seedling, they'll stay nice and dark green if you leave them in the shade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it can get a little more complicated.
Yeah.
Like we're getting a little more advanced, but for your average backyard garden, just put your plants outside for a little bit every day. Yeah. Towards the beginning of May to the end of May, and you'll see you'll get a stronger plant overall with hardening off.
Even most of the greenhouses like Canadian Tire and stuff have the shade netting on top. You'll notice that nothing's in direct full sun because the plants are still weak at that point.
Yeah, but once they're strong, most plants prefer full sun. So we're not talking about the whole season.
Another important thing, it's not only the sun, it's the wind, right? So your plant will need to get strong enough to stand up in the wind so it doesn't just blow over. So what we do with the seedlings and stuff and in the greenhouse, we'll have fans blowing. You could start, we have plants that are only about an inch or two tall. If there was a fan blowing in here right now, the plant will learn to become stronger at the rootstock at this point now. So that's really another thing, because you can walk out and all your seedlings will be laying down from the wind coming by.
Okay, well, excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion in terms of your kind of in-home setup, especially as you're getting ready closer and closer to getting them outside, just preparing them for all that nature has to throw at them.
Yeah.
So we have a couple more questions coming in. We're getting close to the end of our time, so I want to just let our viewers know if there's more questions they want to throw up there. We're going to try to get them answered, offline as well by some of our other partners. Absolutely. So there's a couple questions. I don't know if you want to address some of these. So one was, and it's a little bit of a specific one, but it's about when to start watermelon. But I think maybe we want to broaden that to sort of the squashes, the melons, that type of kind of family.
Sure. So melons and squash and cucumbers, I wouldn't start them any more than 4 weeks before. But even as little as 2 weeks before, and some farmers even direct seed those. Yeah. Because they grow so fast, and they're very nutrient living. So you can this is more of a gardening question than a seed starting question, so I won't get into it too specifically. But once you have your plants in the ground, knowing the nutrients that your plants need is a pretty important part. And the squash family is very nutrient loving, and they need a lot of nutrients, and they need a deep place to plant in. Like that's why you see people growing in pots with squash and things like that, because they need a ton of room. So 2 to 4 weeks before the frost date, and save yourself the trouble from trying to container grow them unless you have huge pots, and give them tons of nutrients.
And some of them can be direct seeded. So
And yeah,
just so
can
you,
direct
they
seed.
don't need to look, I keep saying business names, but if you go to a retail store, let's say, and you find this big squash plant that's, you know, the size of a softball or something, that doesn't mean it's going to produce any better than one that's 2 inches tall at the same time of year
Yeah.
that you planted in the garden. Because again,
They get
it
root
needs
bound.
that heat. The plant needs that heat in the ground. It needs the time. So you'll end up with the same amount of product, but
Yeah.
people are very visual, and I understand.
Yeah.
But just know that just because it's big and green doesn't mean it's going to produce any better than something half its size or even a quarter its size.
Yeah.
At that
even,
time of year, it's too early that time of year anyways.
And like last year, I lost some of my cucumber plants when it got really, really hot. Some of them just didn't survive the heat, and I reseeded in, I don't know, June, beginning of June, and they caught up, and we still did really well with cucumbers. So I'm not, if you're a home gardener, I am not opposed to just direct seeding melons and cucumbers and squash. They grow so fast if they're given the right nutrients.
Yeah, I think that's really good sort of takeaway. I know from my experience, I tend to, unless I'm feeling really ambitious, maybe with zucchini, but I tend to just direct seed with a lot of compost. When you're talking about that nutrient, like really prioritizing that instead of taking space indoors with my seedling trays. But just,
I will say though, the one thing with starting them indoors is that with direct seeding, unless you have a whole row, squirrels, chipmunks, mice, they will eat your seeds. So if you're planning on just having 2 or 3 plants and you put out 2 or 3 seeds, they might get eaten. So starting them indoors will help you to save them from the squirrels and the chipmunks and stuff like that will steal your seeds.
On another note, squash is very sensitive. The roots are very sensitive.
They don't like to be transplanted.
So they don't like to be transplanted. So expect about 30, not 30, but you know, you can have up to 30% loss when you're transplanting squash. So again, direct seeding, you don't have to do it, or plant them later so you only transplant up once.
If you want to have 4 cucumbers, plant 10. Because when they transplant, so don't get discouraged when you transplant them in some die. That's a completely accepted and normal thing in our world.
Jamie doesn't accept it though.
I hate it. I hate when they die, but it's true. Any kind of melon or squash, they don't transplant well. They do like to root where they are.
A tomato, you could pretty well rip the roots right off and shove it in the ground, and it'll still grow.
You could break the whole plant off and throw it away, and it'll still grow. But the squash family, you have to be really gentle when you transplant them.
Okay, so I'm going to try for another question. So there's actually a couple coming in. I think people were really interested in sort of the animals, insects, stealing of seeds.
Oh my.
Do you have any tips for kind of maybe just not, we don't have time for everything. I think we're actually probably going to end up doing a different webinar on that entirely, because that was also questions last time. But I'm thinking maybe, you know, with the cucumber seed scenario, like, could we cover that temporarily until they've germinated something?
Well, okay, so if you're doing it inside and they germinate inside, once you move the plant outside, it's not very likely that something will eat it. Then like you'll have more problems later when there's actual fruit on the plant. But while it's actually growing, not many things bother, unless you have deer or something in your yard, they will eat the greens. But generally the small animals like your chipmunks, squirrels, whatever, they want the seed. So if you're germinating inside, you should be okay. But if you're direct seeding outside, it's so hard. Like like you said, it's a whole other conversation. You can cover things and that will help deter things, but it depends on your area. Like if you're in the country and you've got rabbits and squirrels, and like we still fight with this constantly.
Oh yeah.
So it's a huge topic, and there isn't one simple answer, especially rabbits. I know even in town, rabbits are a huge problem.
There's little things though. You can buy row covers. It depends how big of an area you want to cover. So there's floating row covers. It's made out of really thin fabrics that can sit right on the plant, and as the plant grows, it'll grow up with it. So that'll give it time to germinate. Nothing can get. There's other things. I've seen people cut big water bottles, like 5-gallon water bottles. They cut the bottom off and they stick it over top, and it's almost like a mini greenhouse, just to the point that the plant you know, comes through the ground and starts growing.
Because then you have to take it off or they'll get too hot.
Yeah.
Right.
Some people use like a motion controlled water system, like a sprinkler that'll motion sprinkler, or just something, excuse me, sorry, something simple like Critter Ritter. It's a powder made out of chili peppers.
Okay.
So again, not great on a big scale, but for a small garden, you can buy about a 1 liter thing of Critter Ritter for like $10 at any hardware store or whatever, and just sprinkle it all around. The only problem with things like that is that when it rains heavily, you have to reapply, but it's not a big job, and it's literally just hot pepper powder, so it's completely organic friendly.
They just don't like the.
They don't like the hot pepper.
Yeah.
And it won't hurt the plants at all. So you can spread that around, and it'll even keep like cats. Sometimes cats will dig into gardens and stuff. That's another big problem for us in the country, but little things like that can help without using chemicals.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, one final question. There's tons coming about pets, so we're gonna do a different
we
webinar.
can answer them all after.
Like,
We're just gonna wait,
message us through our Facebook page. Anybody like Cornerstone Organics, send us any. We love answering questions,
Great.
so feel free to send us questions.
It's definitely coming. So I have one final question, and I think you know, your thoughts on starting herbs indoors, and then the question was sort of, should, you know, which ones should we start indoors? You know, things like parsley or chives, rosemary, you know, maybe, or basil, and when that might be. And then the question kind of went to, should those be just maintained in containers, or should they go into the ground? So I don't, you know, maybe answer an element of that.
Jamie's the expert on this side. Just all I can say is never ever plant mint in the garden. Never.
Mint will take over everything, and you'll never get rid
We
of
have an acre of mint now.
it. Yeah, mint will take over. So I'm going to keep it simple and short because I know we're out of time. Treat herbs just like the vegetables. Don't overthink it. The seed packet will tell you most of them are 6 to 8 weeks before the frost date. There are some herbs that take more time, so check your seed packet, but generally they're the 6 to 8 weeks. Some of them are a bit shorter. Basil and chives, I would start more like the 4 to 6 weeks mark. And some of the things like basil, I don't bother putting them in the tiny little seed cell. I put them right in a 4-inch pot, and I sprinkle some seeds in each one so that I don't have to transplant them, because things like basil, it's not one stalk, it's a bundle of stalks. So instead of taking 10 little seedlings and putting them in one pot, I just start in the 4-inch pots.
And most herbs are like that, right?
The parsley, the chives, I don't necessarily put everything in one seed at a time. I sprinkle a little bit into the pots, and then you don't have to transplant. As far as growing them in the ground or a pot, most of them are either or. For your normal herbs, so basil, parsley, chives, oregano, you can easily grow it in a pot or easily grow it in the ground. They're both fine. Their herbs are generally hardy, cut and come back, you know, quite easy. You can get more technical with some harder herbs, or even some perennials like thyme, that kind of stuff. You're going to want to plant it somewhere that it can come back next year, that you're not going to be moving it. So you have to see if your herb is a perennial or an annual. You know, so that, you know, there's a bit of differences in those types of things, but generally treat them like the tomatoes. You know, check the seed packet 6 to 8 weeks before, harden them off, all that stuff. Don't necessarily treat them differently unless it's a perennial.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really great feedback. I would agree with sort of the thoughts of try not to do them in individual packets. Just, you know, you have a pot, you know, that's what you're going to end up transplanting, is sort of that 4-inch pot, which is a little bit different than some of the other things that we've been talking about. So great question.
Anybody feel free to message me. Like, we've had so much help from other farmers in our 10 years that we're more than happy to turn that back out to help people, because we couldn't be where we are without the help of other farmers. So more than happy to spread that around. Like, more people need to know, even if you're not growing your own food, where your food comes from, how it grew. You know, it's very important right now. So that's wonderful. It's a very generous offer. I want to thank you both for all of the insight,
just experience that you've brought to the conversation today. I can tell that our viewers have really appreciated it. There's lots of questions coming in. So, you know, to just extend that forward to our viewers, that Transition Cornwall Plus Food Action Group is here to also support you and to help you make connections with great resources like Jamie and Matt. If you have additional questions, you can either send them directly to Jamie and Matt, or you can go through us on our website. We have our Ask a Gardener down at the bottom. So that's www.transitioncornwall.com/Seedy Saturday. And I also want to direct you to a Facebook group that Transition has created. And I know that Cornerstone Organics is on there, so they can also answer questions through there. So that's the Cornwall SDG Aquasasane Edible gardening group, and so you'll find that. We'll throw in the link into the chat, and we're there. We have lots of expert gardeners there, so we're going to have lots of people helping you as you're making these plans and decisions. Actually, I see Matt or Mark on there, so Mark, throw the link in the chat. We're here with resources and all of that, and we hope to see you next Saturday as we tackle some sort of family activity garden experiences. You know, because as much as this is an individual and family thing, we really want to encourage youth and children to start growing as well. So we have all of that coming for you next Saturday. And I cannot let us go without saying thank you again to our sponsors. So the Eastern Ontario Agri-Food Network and Canadian Organic Growers have been great partners in this event, and we're really thankful for what they've provided to us. And if you've missed this recording, you want to rewatch it, you're going to see that here on Facebook, on our website, our YouTube channel, and you can also watch the recording on Your TV Cornwall. So that's going to premiere, this episode will premiere Tuesday at 9 p.m. on Your TV Cornwall. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Matt and Jamie. I really appreciate everything you've offered. I've learned so much. I know everyone else has, and I wish you well with your growing season and your market season.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Okay.